so without further ado, I shall move into the introduction. So, what glass ceiling? And I think the first thing we need to think about is, what is a glass ceiling? What do we mean by a glass ceiling? And does it exist? A glass ceiling can be defined as an invisible barrier that prevents someone from achieving further success. And glass ceilings aren't just related to gender. They could be related to age, to ethnicity, but of course what we're going to focus on today is gender. And I was actually, when I was doing some reading in preparation for this, I was surprised to find that the term wasn't coined until 1984, which seems to me quite late, because obviously when we look at the statistics for the contributions of women in science, it was obvious from a much earlier stage that men were better represented than women were. But there didn't seem to be a recognition of this officially, if you like, until quite late. So the glass ceiling, it's not a tangible barrier. It's very hard to identify, and it persists in very subtle ways. And these are some of the things that I would like us to discuss when we get through the presentations. And something I'm particularly interested to explore, and I don't want to explore this in a negative way, I want to explore this in a very positive way, is to what extent this glass ceiling is imposed upon women, or to what extent do we impose it upon ourselves? And if we do, how do we recognise it, and what do we do about it? And amongst those things, I'd like us to explore the very obvious experience that women are more inclined to have self-doubt about their abilities, and to suffer from what can be called the imposter syndrome. That shouldn't be my job, that should be somebody else's. I can't possibly do that job. I don't have the talents to do that job. And to feel that they are in some way an imposter. Now, can you quantify the glass ceiling? And in the two presentations we've had already this week, people have quantified it, and they've used scissor diagrams to show that if we look across an academic career from undergraduate, postgraduate, and through to lecturers, senior lecturers, professors, then yes, the divide between men and women does increase. You can actually quantify it, and of course the European Commission have quantified it, and they have a glass ceiling index. And it's a measure of the relative chance for females as compared to males of reaching a top position. So if there is a glass ceiling index of 1, it indicates there's no difference. If it's less than 1, females are overrepresented. If it's more than 1, then females are underrepresented. Now, across 22 European countries in academic institutions, these are the sorts of figures we see. That in 2010, the index was 1.8. Now, that's actually quite a small improvement over 3 years, where in 2007 that value was 1.9. So there is no doubt that women are underrepresented, but we need to ask ourselves why. Is it a glass ceiling? What do we do about it? And it's interesting that in no country across Europe is the glass ceiling index equal or less than 1. So, which brings me on to the next slide, which is that what this implies, so we've had the examples of female academic progression, but I want to use a different example here, which is that men set the scientific agenda. And I don't mean this in a negative way, it's what the figures actually show us. So the scientific landscape continues to be male-dominated. So in 2010, 5.5% of senior positions in European higher education institutions were occupied by women. Now, that's a big improvement over 2007, where it was only 22%. Sorry, these figures here are for board members. So by board members, these are board members at a national level. So this might be grant awarding bodies, for example. And so in 2010, 1 in 3 positions were occupied by women, and that was a significant improvement over 2007, when 22%. And it's interesting that in the Nordic countries, there is actually a national policy that at least 40% of positions on national boards have to be occupied by either gender. not just women, either gender. And so in those countries, so that's Finland, Norway, Sweden, the numbers actually approach 50% of women on those boards. And again, this is something we perhaps want to come back to and discuss a bit further. So the bottom line, top decision-making committees determine scientific agenda, and they're mainly occupied by men currently. Is that a problem? We may feel that's not a problem. So what I want to do to introduce this is that myself and Elaine are going to run through our own careers and have a look at where we think a glass ceiling may or may not have existed. So for mine, I was awarded... So the first... And it's not just glass ceiling. I've also said these are hurdles in the labyrinth, because all of us, whether we're men or whether we're women, have a labyrinth, which is a complex path of our careers. And there are various hurdles we have to get across as we go through those careers. So I'd like us to think about this not just in terms of a glass ceiling, but in terms of hurdles in the labyrinth. So my first hurdle, and for most of us, our first hurdle, was obtaining a PhD. I got my own PhD in 1982. I don't think there was any glass ceiling as applied to that. I will comment, though, that when I turned up for my PhD viva, my external examiner thought I was the secretary who was there to take the notes. I think that the most significant hurdle in this labyrinth is getting a permanent job, to get the position, because then that's the platform where you can take off and you can start to form your own future career. So I got my lectureship in Bristol, University of Bristol, in 1990. And something that we've touched upon earlier in the first two sessions was the importance of mentorship and sponsorship by our senior colleagues to help us attain various goals in our careers. And something that Caroline pointed out early on was, and it wasn't Caroline, it was Abby Fowden, was that sometimes these relationships with your sponsor, your mentor, can actually be quite confrontational, or they almost have to be, because this person is guiding you perhaps through a difficult path. And I suffered from imposter syndrome when I applied for my lectureship back in 1990. I didn't think, why should someone give me a lectureship? Surely somebody else would get it. And I have to say my sponsor at that time, who was the PI whose lab I was working in, was incredibly supportive and actually helped me cross that barrier. He encouraged me to go to places that I didn't want to go to, that were difficult, that were uncomfortable. And sometimes we just have to face that. And to get an enlightened and a career, we need to cross uncomfortable barriers. One comment I'd make about the lectureship, again, there was no glass ceiling involved in that, but there were 6 of us shortlisted for the lectureship, and one of my male colleagues was another internal applicant, and he came to see me in the week before the interviews for the lectureship, and he said he deserved the lectureship more than I did, because he had a wife and a family to support. And I pointed out to him that if he had to, and of course I was single and I could move anywhere to get my next job, that was, not a problem. And I had to point out to him that if he moved somewhere else, he took his world with him. And if I had to move somewhere else, I had to make my new world again. And I think it's just these sort of misconceptions which contribute to the subtle form of the glass ceiling. Okay, so progress through the career. And something I just want to focus on briefly here is I married my husband John after a brief courtship in 2001. We had to be brief because we realised our joint ages were in excess of 100. And so we better get on with it quickly. And I acquired my stepdaughter Hannah. And the reason I put this in here is because it took 20 years, to get from here to here. And my career actually has moved much more quickly since then. And that's to a large extent by having a supportive partner. And this is something that's come back in the presentations in the last 2 days, is the importance of having supportive relationships. So, moving through, these are some of the landmarks in the career. I'm going to be brief now. Meeting Secretary of Physiological Society, the first female officer of the society in its 130-year history at that time, and we've only just got the second one, who was appointed this week. I chair in 2008, and also in 2008 I became head of School of Physiology and Pharmacology, which in many ways is a very rewarding position. And one of the things I take great pride in, I think one of the most rewarding things about having positions of leadership is that it enables you to support and enable colleagues to achieve their ambitions. And one of the things that I have focused on a lot in this is in support of women, and we are one of a few university departments in the UK to have a Silver Swan Award, which is in recognition of our support of women in the STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering and maths. Chair of Organising Committee of the IUPS, I put this in here, not because it's a major landmark necessarily, but because I did have to point out to the Council of IUPS that at the opening and closing committee of this meeting, I'll be the only woman on the platform, and I think that's actually very telling and quite shocking. 2000, I put this one in. So this year, I unsuccessfully applied for deanship at the University of Bristol, and I put that in there simply because, okay, I applied for it, I had the right credentials, I could have been appointable, but there was a better applicant, and that applicant happens to be a man, and so I don't see that as a glass ceiling, it's just the way of the world. So I'm going to stop mine, and I'm going to ask Elaine to say a few words about her own glass ceilings before we move on to other speakers. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Bridget. I hope I'm going to be very brief. I want to say that I'm always terrified when I need to speak something about myself, but, I really start to think, and, it's not my great-grandmother. That was my grandmother, that was my great-grandmother, and that was my great-great-grandmother. And they went to Brazil. Can you imagine? They were really pioneers, They were really people that, they didn't know what to find in that land and things like that, but they were starving in the north of Italy. So they just need to live and try to get some land. So in the end, I have this kind of blood. That is wonderful, isn't it? I don't know how to move the slide. Sorry.
It says F, it goes forward.
Yeah, oh, good. Thank you very much. And concerning my life, I really agree what about Bridget told. Sometimes you put some things that don't make you go further. I was born in a village in Brazil, almost Italian village. So in 1997, I need to decide, I'm moving for my parents' house or not, because in my parents' house where they live, there was no college. And my father, he doesn't want me to leave. And he told me, okay, if you go, you are on your own. It means no food, nothing more from him. And I said, I'm going, crying every day, praying, oh, what's going to happen? But I went. But I think this is terrible. Maybe in some families in Brazil, I don't know in other countries if it happens or not. But I left everything behind and I decided to go. And I may say, I didn't have any sponsorship, any model. The model I had is my mother, my aunties, and people there get married and have children, and that's it. And the husband would say, everything you need to do. But I don't want it for me. I don't want. Anyway, another problem. I should start my master and my PhD. I was scared. Did I had, ability? Intellectual ability was clever enough to do. I was insecure for that, but I went on. Difficult, for sure, so I went. And I just want to show that. I had my daughter, by accident, I may say, in the end of my PhD. Really, it's a black hole in my life. I don't know how I survived it. And I just know that I need to look after her, and I had a boss that was a monster. He's a monster until now. Can you imagine? She was 20 days, I went back to work because I was in despair. And as in the first day, somebody told, our sons and daughters, I have just one, are okay, very well adjusted. She doesn't, she doesn't use cocaine or anything else. She's fine. So you listen to. I had many pots of flowers in the flat where I used to live. All of them died. I don't know what was my relationship with my husband. I don't know. I don't remember. But she survived it, and that's okay. And I was working. 2 years after I finished my PhD, I went to Manchester, where I met Nancy for 2 years. I may say that I didn't like very much my supervisor, but I need to do my postdoc because my husband went there to do a postdoc specifically with somebody. I could not choose who was my supervisor or not. I did what I could do. You understand? So it's the mommy's daughter and the ideal wife. Anyway, I did that. In the end, I got a job in the same place with my husband. I had a depression crisis after that, a really bad one. But, I keep going, and it's okay. It was difficult, very difficult. Maybe what Bridget said, it's our way. You don't know. We just need to be resilient with the things. We have determination, and that's it. Grants and things like that, and this was something that changed completely my life. I met, I can say the name, it was Professor John Nichols. He's in Italy now. I was a student in one of his courses. I like very much his behavior with his students, with everybody. And I met him in 1994. In 1998, I organized my first neuroscience course from IBRO in Brazil, in Ribeirão Preto. And since then, he's together with me, I think he's my mentor, my everything, my idol, my model, because I don't know, since then, I invited him to Brazil almost every year, because I want to share his behavior with students, with women, with men, with everybody, with all my colleagues, with all students. It's important. And in 2002, I was invited to be a lecturer, and one of the IBRO VLTP is visiting lecturer team. So I'm going to Africa, to India, and all the other countries in South America to teach neuroscience with John and Jack McMahon from US and many other lecturers. And it changed completely my life. I really became more confident. I have a chance to somebody help me to understand that I have value. And, the other things, for sure, I wasn't accepted as a professor. Doesn't matter. I will try again this year. I hope I get it, I am persistent with those things. And it was a man also that got the position. Doesn't matter. Maybe he was much better than I will try again. And with all these contacts, I help. I wasn't responsible, but I help, and Bridget know that, between the first joint meeting of the Brazilian Society and the British Physiological Society. For me, I'm really proud of that. Now I am part of IBRO Women World Neuroscience Committee, and it's nice to share this experience and to be with all of you. Okay? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Elaine. I think it's very useful to have some personal experiences, careers, and I heard of that. Nancy, could I ask you to...
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to begin because last week I had a career meeting with a female research fellow from Canada who's going back. And she asked me a question. She said, did I regret the sacrifices I'd made to get to where I am in my career? And my answer surprised her. I said, I don't think I've made any. I've made the choices I wanted to do at the time, and I don't regret them. I should also say that I don't think the concept of a glass ceiling is particularly helpful. It gives the idea that there's some barrier that you will hit at some point in your career just because you're a woman, when in reality we all meet barriers for very different reasons at very different times. And the idea that there's something that is going to absolutely stop you getting to the top if you have the ability and the determination, I think isn't particularly helpful. Having said that, I acknowledge, and I see all the time, how few women there are in senior positions. The index from the European Union would be interesting because I'm Vice-Chancellor of the University of Manchester. There are 24 universities in the UK that are called Russell Group, that are considered to be the leading research universities, and I'm the only one of 24. So that's really a pretty dreadful index. I am also on the board of a top company in the UK, and there are 3 out of 12 women on it. And to answer one of the questions earlier, there is quite extensive research to show that there is a strong correlation between profitability and the percentage of women on boards. Now, you don't know that it's the women that make the companies more profitable, or just that they're enlightened companies who make profits and decide that they need women. But I won't go through my whole career, but I do want to make a couple of comments about it. First of all, I never planned anything, ever. I just got on with what I was enjoying doing at the time, and as opportunities arose, I took them or didn't, depending on whether I thought they were good ones. And I guess there was a significant change in 2004, because prior to that I'd taken on some leadership roles in the university, but I was a full-time research professor funded by the Medical Research Council. And 2 universities in Manchester merged, and we got a new Vice-Chancellor from Melbourne, and he called me to breakfast one day just before he began and asked me if I'd be the Vice President for Research for the university. And I said no. And he spent the next week and he convinced me to take on that role, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Then I became Deputy Vice-Chancellor in 2010, and as he was deciding to stand down through ill health, and he sadly died, everybody kept asking me if I was going to apply. And I said, no, I was not going to apply. And in fact, they even gave me a coach to talk me into being an applicant, which of course I may not have got it. And he asked me what the odds were that I would apply, and I said 90-10. And he said, for or against? And I said, oh, against, absolutely. And he talked me through various things. And I went away at Christmas, and I came back, and he said, what are the odds now? I said, 80-20. He said, still against? I said, no, in favour. He said, what's changed your mind? And I said, a book has changed my mind. And it's not often that a book does. And it's this book. It's called Beyond the Boys Club. I don't know the author, I've never met her, so I've no reason to promote it. And there's a lot in the book that you know, and like many books like this, you feel it could be condensed into a few pages. But the thing that absolutely struck me was how often, and I hate to generalise, men will look at a job and think, I could probably do almost half of that, I'll apply. And women look and think, God, I can only do half of it, I won't apply. And it was the sudden realisation I was looking at the strengths of my predecessor, where I didn't have strengths, rather than looking at what my own strengths were. And I would say the key thing about succeeding in a career is being true to your own strengths. And don't try to be somebody different. Don't try to behave like a man, be female, feminine, whatever, because I think that that is certainly a way forward in terms of success. Again, I don't like to generalise, but I know many women on my staff who I try to push forward for jobs, and they have the same attitude. I can't do that. I wouldn't be as good as so-and-so. And also I know many who've held positions, such as heads of school, who've said, actually, I want to stand down. This isn't for me. And I try and talk them into staying, but they just say they don't feel comfortable in that leadership role. And I think we should recognise that some women and some men do not want to take on those leadership positions, and that's absolutely fine. It may be more common in women than men, but nevertheless, it's something that I think we should recognise. In general, I find that women work better in teams than as individuals, and that is certainly my style, and it's a contrast from my predecessor, who absolutely led from the front as a very, very strong individual. I rely on the team around me, and I like working that way. And I love a quote in this book, which says, remember that without his army, Napoleon was just a man in a hat. And I think to build those around you is very helpful. Just a couple of other things to comment, because we want to leave time for discussion at the end. All my mentors have been male. I haven't particularly chosen them. I did my PhD at a time when the glass ceiling had never been heard of, and I never dreamt that there would ever be any hindrance to me in succeeding, and that was partly my mother who told me there never would be, and that's what I think you have to accept. There will be hurdles. Undoubtedly there will be hurdles. Whether it's you fail to get something, and I failed to get plenty of things, whether it's family issues, whether it's the decision as to whether to move to another country or not. And we have in Manchester something called a Student Learning Commons. It's a big new building, and carved on the walls are the sayings of people from Manchester, everybody from Morrissey to Emily Pankhurst, Engels and Rutherford. And they took one of mine, and they took it from an interview I did for New Scientist, and I didn't remember saying this, but it was that title, and it's what I'll leave you with, and I think it's been my philosophy, which is listen to your head, but follow your heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Some food for thought there. So could I ask Anna to come and speak to us next? And Anna will give us a perspective from a young scientific career.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Bridget, for inviting me today. So in discussions with Bridget on what I should talk about today, she asked me to bring in some comparisons between Brazil and UK. I did my PhD in Brazil and came to UK as a postdoc, and now I'm a research fellow here and have the intention of staying. So I've been a scientist here much longer than I have been in Brazil, so this was interesting for me. It was actually a bit of a learning process about what's happening in Brazil currently. It's been 8 years since I left Brazil, and a lot has changed. So these are junior research roles in 2012, and I was able to find some really good comparable data between both countries. So this funding body in Brazil is one of the largest in Brazil. It funds the whole country, and it collects. It was quite good at collating data. So here we have PhD, postdoc, and the fellow level in Brazil would be equivalent to a junior fellowship here or young investigator grants. So you can see here there's a staggering difference when we get to this stage compared to actually women being overrepresented as postdocs in Brazil. At postdoc stage, in University of Bristol at least, we have comparable numbers, but again, there is a drop when we get to junior fellowship level. The reason for this drop is quite hard to measure. When we look at this, it might give the appearance that there is a glass ceiling there, but we're not really asking the right questions. Why? Is this some kind of discrimination, or is it barriers that women are putting on themselves? Looking at active academic positions in Brazil, they're actually not that good at collating data on that. I could not find a progression along the career, but we have data showing all the active academic positions. So this would be lectureship level all the way up to professorship, all mixed together. And actually the difference is not that great. In Brazil, we have a big difference between private and public universities. The federal universities are the main institutions involved with research, whereas private universities virtually don't do any research. So if it was a matter of women shying away from the competition of research grants, we would be seeing a big difference here, and we really don't. And I don't think that difference is that great, considering how different things were 10, 20 years ago in Brazil. In the UK, in University of Bristol, and this is just for the science, engineering and technology faculties, we can see that there is clearly the appearance of a glass ceiling, especially when we get to reader and professorship levels. But again, this is only showing proportion of women. It's not telling us anything about the reasons behind that difference. And there is quite a big difference in behavior in terms of research grant application between men and women, actually. When I was reading on this, I found a very comprehensive study that was commissioned by the largest funding bodies in UK and in Europe. And they looked at grant application behavior in female researchers. So the conclusion was that the success rate for grant applications, so of the women that are applying for grants, the success rate is equal to males. Actually, we are slightly more successful in a lot of countries. This includes some statistics from Brazil as well, at least in the state of São Paulo. The data collated by FAPESP shows that women are being just as successful as men, the number that apply for grants, but there are fewer women applying for grants. We're also less likely to be the principal investigators in the grants applied. This is for UK. We apply for shorter grants and apply for less money. And in the UK, it appears that women are more likely to apply for their own salary as well on their grant applications. Being from a different generation, now sharing a bit of my personal experience, if there is a glass ceiling, I never experienced it. My mother was a feminist at heart. She was a housewife, but a feminist at heart, the most fierce type, because they want better for their daughters. And she always pushed me into doing things I was scared of doing. And being an immigrant in this country, being a female, being from an ethnic minority, and having chosen a field of research where it's very much a boys' club, the majority of my peers are male, I think I would be in the worst possible position you can imagine, and I never experienced any kind of discrimination from any of these areas. My male colleagues were always very supportive, and I think I actually had a bit of advantage compared to male junior colleagues as well, because I think one of the first hurdles you have as a young scientist is to be known and recognized by your own peers, by people in your own microcosmos, and being the odd one out made it easier for me to be remembered, for me to be known by my colleagues. And I really, if there is a glass ceiling, I haven't hit it yet, and I haven't experienced it yet. Thank you.
Okay, and our final presenter is Ole Petersen, who's going to give the male perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Bridget, for inviting me here. I feel a bit like an imposter here in this company. My point will be that there is maybe a bit of complacency here, and I think there are actually bits of glass ceiling around. It may not a complete glass ceiling, but there are bits of glass ceiling around, and one of the points I will make is that maybe it is not always directly experienced by women, but is more hidden. So I will start with some very quick slides because they are self-explanatory and are obvious ones. But just look at this. And just look at this. These are points that we made hundreds of times, so I'm not going to dwell on this. This is the way it is. I have chosen the ERC for a particular reason. I spent a lot of time in this building as member of various ERC grant panels. I chaired the starting grant panel for physiology, passive physiology for a number of years now. I serve on the consolidator grant panel. The reason for focusing a bit on the ERC are several-fold. First of all, it's a very important funding body. It will be a lot more important in Horizon 2020. There's a huge increase in the budget for the ERC in Horizon 2020. It is an organization that only judges grants on the basis of scientific excellence. There is no other criterion that is allowed for the ERC. There's no preferential treatment for women. It is even one of those organizations that if you mention it, the secretary of the panel will say it's not a criterion here. And there are no other criterions apart from scientific excellence. So it's interesting to look at some of the statistics from there. So this is the latest result from the 2013 starting grant call, the first result this year for the ERC, just published a few days ago. And so the bottom line is that it's better than it has been before. I can put it that way. You see 30% of the grants won in this immensely competitive grants, because these are, in a sense, generally now regarded as the possibly most important grants as markers of excellence in Europe. And you see that the result is better this year than before. It's a significant jump from 24% of the grants last year to women this year to 30%. This is a trend that has been continuing for several years. So that's good, although you could still say that 30% is only 30%. You see the results for all the different European countries. These are not the places where the grants are held, and those of you from the UK may be a bit puzzled by that, because you hear all the time that the UK is the most successful country in the UK in terms of winning ERC grants. This is the passport of the PI that is there, and although it has nothing to do with gender, I just make the point because it is politically, I think, quite important at the moment. If you instead look at the country of the host institution, you see that for those of you who are from the UK, very nice, the UK does best, but look at this. These are the nationals with their passport. So the UK is successful because of people like Elaine who come from other countries. It's not successful because of the people we have educated here in this country. You see, if it had been just for the nationals, then actually a number of other countries were considerably better than the UK. This, I think, is a very important point politically. It has, I think, big implications if you think particularly about UK attitude to the European Union. But anyway, it's beside the point here. This is the crucial one, and this is the one that, as I say, makes one a little bit cautious about some of the things, and I disagree there a little bit with the point that Elaine made. The statistics from the ERC are different. And as you see here, the general picture is that the success rate for female applicants is less. So this is success rate. This is not nothing to do with the number of applications. There are places, grants held in the UK is good. They're the same, female and male, and Holland is the same. But in general, you see that they are below. Again, so much of this area is really whether the glass is half full or half empty. You come back to that all the time. On the one hand, you can sort of say, well, it's not that different, so more or less okay. But you cannot deny that, on the whole, the success rate is less. I don't have the explanation for that, and I think that may be something that is worth exploring in the discussion. What is the reason for that? Should explain to those people who are not familiar with the ERC that there is an interview in all cases at the end of the process, and so that's just one element there. You will also notice, again, against complacency in the UK, that if you look at success rate, the UK is by no means the most successful country in Europe. Switzerland and Israel are considerably more successful. So, coming back to the more parochial again, all of us have responsibilities. Just from my own very small world, outstanding investigator in my lab, who is a lecturer. But we have many husband and wife teams, and so Julia has a husband, Oleg Gerasimenko. Sometimes one is the first author, sometimes another one. They are not that different in age. And again, just mention as a fact, Oleg Gerasimenko is a reader and Julia is a lecturer. If you go to a quite different level, I happen to be both a fellow of the Royal Society and a member of the German National Academy of Sciences. They are more or less the same, more or less of the same age. The German Academy is actually a few years older than the Royal Society, although the Royal Society tends to forget that. Interestingly enough, the principal officers, the same numbers in these two academies. You will notice that of the vice presidents, there are 2 female vice presidents in Germany, so 50% of the vice presidents are female. If you look at the Royal Society, it is only 1 of 4, and regrettably, very soon, it will be an all-male lineup. So I just finish on that note. I think one should not be very complacent. There are glass ceilings, difficult to speak about them in public, but I have sometimes been surprised in various committees, particularly when discussion gets a bit heated and some people want a particular candidate to win out. And suddenly in that situation where the pressure is on, suddenly remarks come out that you would not have expected to hear. These are very often not met directly by women. And sort of one of the tasks that I have often found myself in is basically just to try to remove this obstruction, not engaging in preferential action, but when you meet unreasonable arguments, and I have to say quite frankly that they do exist, and they do come out from time to time. This is why I say the glass ceiling is definitely not complete. It's patchy, but it does exist. And I think there is not room entirely for complacency, and I'll just enter that note.
Yes, please.
Hello, thank you for organizing this session and to the speakers. My name is Christina Karatzaferia. I'm from Greece, the University of Thessaly. I have a question for Professor Petersen. You mentioned the success rates in ERC, and you mentioned there is the interview. So, do you have any specific advice for maybe women, maybe something you've seen, something that you think women should be working on when they present the proposals in an interview to a committee like yours?
No, that is an interesting point. I've obviously thought about it. As I say, I don't actually have an explanation for why these success rates are different. The figures are there. There is probably a tendency, and I think actually it's a good thing, and I hope that attitudes gradually change, actually, that women are possibly more honest, actually, than men are. Sort of Paul Nurse hinted at that problem, actually, in his introduction to this Congress on Sunday afternoon, and may tend to give more differentiated answers to questions, whereas the men very often will feel very sure and push something, and it is possible that that somehow makes for a different impression on the panels. I have to say the interviews in the ERC are really important. They change the priority order based on the papers. Interviews are not just sort of confirming the priority order. We see often big changes afterwards. Maybe the most important point is the questioning period. I mean, as such, it's a good procedure. The ERC, 10-minute presentation, 20-minute discussion. The discussion is, as we call it, polite but insistent in getting answers. And maybe that is. I think eventually this will begin to change in the favor of women, I think. As you know, one of the really big problems in the biomedical science at the moment is actually the high level of irreproducibility of biomedical science. Many people in pharma, I'm sure that Nancy will know about that, will say 75% of the published literature cannot be reproduced. This is one of the really big time bombs in science. And so a more honest, more differentiated approach may actually eventually win out. So I wouldn't recommend a change, but I think that many of the people making decisions may need to think quite seriously about that.
Thank you very much.
Does anybody else on the panel want to add to that particular question? Or should we invite more questions from the floor? Do we have more questions from the floor?
So if that's the case, and I agree with Nancy, because I've felt it myself, that many women feel that they have half half the cup is full and we have half the answers, so we don't put ourselves forward. Should we be training women to be more positive, or should we be training the people who are interviewing to take on that aspect of women when they come?
I would say the preference is changing those who interview. Having said that, that could take a long time, so I think we have to meet part way.
How can we do that
then? I think in many cases it's not, certainly I haven't really experienced many derogatory comments about women or inhibitory ones. It's more reminding them. And the first thing is having women on panels. It's amazing how many times I comment. I was invited to be on a committee for a very senior appointment, a president of a university. And there were 2 stages of interviews, and I was going to have to do the first one by teleconference. And I had to tell the panel that this was not acceptable because there will be no woman in the room, and they had 2 female candidates. As soon as they were made aware, they were embarrassed and apologetic, but they hadn't thought about the fact that this was just not acceptable. So I think, there's a lot of continual reminding, and just one woman often isn't enough.
Yes, please.
Fiona Hatch from University of Surrey. I have a question on actually whether we're looking at the wrong glass ceiling. So we consider the glass ceiling to be with career, where you're progressing to be a professor or a deanship. But is it perhaps for women, the glass ceiling is being able to have a family at the same time as having a career? And the fact you'd actually have to take time off to have the family, you're removed from your field, you're removed at being that person. How can that be changed? How did you make the decision that, okay, I'm having a family now, or is it just random?
Anna, do you want to say?
I talked to a lot of female colleagues, junior female colleagues from Brazil and from UK before this meeting. And their impressions are something we have to think about. There is the impression that progressing in the career successfully and quickly is incompatible to having good quality with life, with your family. So there is this big compromise that needs to be made, and some of the junior females in science are just not ready to make it. And there are lots of impressions that are putting off women from progressing in science. And some of them are misconceptions that basically if you don't have a certain profile, if you didn't finish your PhD by this age and you did a postdoc in this country and then you came back with this fellowship, you might as well give up. And lots of career advice seminars I've been to, you come out of them with this impression. And the most lasting impression I had from a career advice seminar was actually a male colleague talking, and he had a very unusual pathway in his career. He's very successful now. And he said, there's several ways from going from point A to point B. And you can take the most direct, straight route and the quickest one, but you can, take several pathways that will take you there, and it doesn't mean you can't get there if you choose these pathways.
Actually, one of the small ways in which we look at issues that face women at Bristol as part of our SWAN initiative is we do things like when we have female speakers who come for our lunchtime seminars, we ask them to have a session with staff, and it can be men and women, but it is women, just to talk about their careers and how they've managed their families and how it is feasible. And everybody's path is very different. And Sue has been responsible for coordinating a booklet, and I hope many of you have picked it up, about the women in physiology. And again, everybody's pathway is different. So it is possible, and I'm not suggesting it's easy, and one does have to plan, but it is very possible. I think I've got somebody waiting for a question there.
I just want to comment on that. My name is Alexandra Hernion-Code. I'm from France, and I am quite passionate on science, and since the very beginning. And I happen to be a mother of 5 children. I think that the way I sort of combine both careers, because 5 children is quite of a tribe to to take care of, is pretty much by having a good health, which is in my case, which has really saved me, and being able to not to sleep much at night. And the last thing, which is really important to me, which was that I discovered during my postdoctorate, having my second child there, that if I were to take my maternity leaves, especially as they are designed in France, which is you have a good maternity leave, then my career was completely gone. So the only way I did that was by working through my maternity leaves and never stopped. So when I'm saying you have to have a good health, that's what I mean.
Does any of our panel want to comment on that? Yes. And that was certainly a message we were getting yesterday about juggling the balls. Well, it's not just about getting help. It's also about, importantly, I believe, about not feeling guilty. Oh, so, yeah. But it's not feeling guilty about. It's finding the quality time and not the quantity necessarily. Yeah. We've got one here, and then we've got 2 more lined up. So we're going to be running short of time, so please can you ask your question now? And could the other 2 of you perhaps get into a microphone ready to do yours?
It's really more of a comment following on from that, is just talking about males and having male sponsors or mentors. It was my a male conversation, or a conversation with a male I had about having children, and what he said to me was, don't wait, don't necessarily plan the perfect time for having a child, because it won't ever be a perfect time. So that was one thing from a male. And some conversations I've had with other males about childcare and things is two fairly senior people actually leave work at 4:30 to do the childcare. So it's not just a female issue about when you have children. I think, you know, there is really something to do with males as well. So and they're taking the roles on as well. And I think the landscape's changing slightly about what's going on there. So I think that's something to keep an eye on.
Yes, that's been something of a recurring theme in the last 2 sessions.
Just another comment about how universities ought to protect this huge resource you've got in terms of trained postdocs. It's cost an awful lot of money and time to get people to that stage. My experience from a friend who works in the research of a big industry for Unilever was that they desperately wanted to keep get that person back in the workforce. So apart from being given far better maternity sort of conditions than you would ever get in higher education, she was given a lot of help with flexible working and able to sort of, she works full time, but she was given a lot of help to get to that stage because they didn't want to lose her. And I don't feel a lot of the people commenting here is what women have to do for themselves, organise their childcare, get their family in, etc., etc. And I don't think that a lot has been done historically by the higher education sort of resource to actually say we don't want to lose this trained workforce.
Point well made.
Yeah, mine is not a comment as such, but a suggestion, an idea. Yes. Because I don't want what we are doing here, interesting as it is, to end up just like this. We met last in Japan, and we are meeting here again. There should be a continuity. That's why I'm passing that paper around. I think we should suggest to Christy Stoke to send probably a certificate of attendance to all of us through our email addresses, and probably create a space for us on Facebook or something like that, so that we will be interacting as the year goes by, so that by the time we're meeting again in Brazil 2017, it will not be a new thing. It's appearing as if it's a new idea completely here, whereas we met at Japan and there was no follow-up as such. That's my suggestion. Or probably we have 2 or 3 people in UK, because if you invite me from Nigeria, you have to pay for my transport. So 2 or 3 people in UK as a committee to be in charge of these women physiologists and consider what we do as follow-up. Thank you. That's my suggestion.
Okay, and it's a very good suggestion. I will certainly carry that forward with the IUPS Council to get some sort of networking underway. And because it certainly is our intention to have other sessions like this when we get to Brazil, but to have some continuity before then would be good. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Bernadette Stalica from Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. It's just really a statement and a personal opinion. I think until science and business in general accommodates for childcare as part of their system, I think it will be inherently biased towards males, because we have to understand that men and women are very different. I think, as a colleague was saying, women undergo physiological changes when they're pregnant and when they're just postpartum, sleep deprivation, etc. It is not as easy as it might be a stereotype, but for a man. So we have to build in childcare and other things into the system, or else I think in the next 10, 20 years we'll still see a gap. That's fine.
Does anybody want to comment on that?
No, thank you.
I think it is self-evident. I was speaking to a colleague at Bristol University who had been working in Germany, and apparently they have a very good system there. I don't know if there's anyone from Germany who wants to comment on that. But the in order to maintain their female colleagues within academia, were actually providing childcare and care in the home, and that was just making a huge difference. Yeah. Have we more questions? If not, I'd like to thank you for coming on to the session today. Oh, we've got a question.
Not necessarily a question, just a comment, because like the one I made the last time, I'm from Africa, and our problems are so peculiar because we have cultural things that are against women. even if you are personally determined to make it, the structure, you know, and even within yourself, there's this thing, you know, about you that would, you know, be against your progress. So I don't know if you can also think of pulling those of us who are from cultures that really are not very friendly, that are really posing glass ceilings for us as women who are in careers, in different careers. You know, because here, you know, you don't have, you are starting from a higher level. So your problems are not the same as we have. We can have just ordinary mundane problems, you know, in the society, just everyday living, which poses a big glass ceiling for the average career woman and the average woman who is a career woman in any area, you know, that she is operating in. Mm-hmm. So I think that we should also consider that and try to pull us out, you know, from where we are at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to comment on that useful comment? Okay. Do we have any more? Is this a question coming forward? No? In which case, can I thank you all very much for coming to this session? They've been extremely well attended. I think my own view is that they have been very useful. I've certainly found them useful. And we will, at the suggestion, start to get some networking together in advance of the next meeting in Brazil. Okay, thank you very much.